So good evening and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening. Just to point out, as is possibly clear from the tops of the screens, that this event this evening is being recorded and will be made available on the university alumni website after the event. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Adrian Moore. I'm head of the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences in the Faculty of Health Sciences and Wellbeing here at the University of Sunderland. And this evening, it's my really great pleasure to welcome Andrew as a past graduate of the University of Sunderland, well, as Polytechnic as was, from 1981 to give us this presentation this evening. It is with a tinge of sadness, unfortunately, that we're having to do this presentation this evening in this manner on Teams. I'm sure everybody understands the reasons for that, and under normal circumstances, we would be able to have a social gathering within the Sciences complex, and I'm sure some old friends would have been able to catch up in a much more informal way than we're able to this evening. As we're aware, we are on camera this evening and we're on Teams, so if you don't want to be visible, please do turn cameras off. Everybody's microphones is automatically muted. So this year represents the 100th year of pharmacy education here at the University of Sunderland. And this particular event, we're welcoming Andrew, and marks the first in a series of events over the coming year to celebrate that centenary. And that centenary provides us with an opportunity to look back at the vision of a very inspirational lady, Hope Winch, who in her own way decided to positively impact pharmacy services here in the local region by establishing pharmacy education and training here in Sunderland. And as I'm sure we're all aware, that vision has gone from strength to where we currently stand now. And the next few months will give us a really nice opportunity to reflect on that vision of what Hope Winch started all those years ago and how it has evolved through the ever-changing faces of pharmacy and pharmacy services, and how the university has actually evolved from the original technical college and through the Polytechnic and now to the university that it is. And in that spirit, Andrew will sort of talk to us about what he sees as the current challenges for community pharmacy in the current period and how that's going to evolve over the coming years. Also, this period gives us an opportunity, and as I say, we're welcoming many former graduates here today. It gives us an opportunity just to recognise and think about how each of us have contributed in our own individual and our own group ways to how healthcare has been positively impacted by what has been offered here at the university and how individuals have gone on in their careers to actually develop improvement to patient healthcare. And say from those small and very ambitious beginnings from what Hope Winch started away, we've moved on to what is a suite of thriving healthcare programs here at the university, not only in the arena of pharmacy, but also now we have nursing, we have medicine, we have mental health nursing, we will soon have midwifery and child nursing, we have occupational therapy and physiotherapy. So that vision that Hope Winch first started has really evolved now into a broad spectrum of healthcare provision. And I think we are all hugely grateful for that vision that she started so many years ago. And just on that note, and as this is our centenary year, we're asking pharmacy alumni and university friends, if they are able, to help provide us with support to our current pharmacy students who will hope continue that spirit that Hope Winch had. And the Hope Winch Benevolence Fund is there to provide financial grants to support pharmacy students facing any financial hardship. And that is a significant issue, obviously, over this most recent of years. And we believe that all students, regardless of financial background, should have the opportunity to succeed in their pharmacy education and future pharmacy careers. And if you'd like to make a contribution to that, we would more than welcome those, and Elena will put a little link to the alumni pages in the chat function. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Andrew this evening, who will present this evening's presentation. And forgive me, I'm going to sort of read a little bit in terms of a bio. So Andrew has kindly agreed to take questions after this talk, and what we'd encourage people to do is just to pop questions into the chat function as we move through the course of this evening. And Paul Carter, as chair of the Hope Winch Society, has agreed to sort of chair that session of question and answers after Andrew's presentation. So hopefully people will have a number of things to actually ask of Andrew at the end. So Andrew, originally from Marske here in the northeast, graduated from what was Sunderland Polytechnic in 1981, went on to do his pre-registration training with Boots and progressed to be Superintendent Pharmacist for 16 pharmacies down in Southampton area, and subsequently moved on to be an area manager for Lloyds. He's had sort of visionary work in developing the contribution of pharmacies within medical centres, and was part of the establishment of the first Lloyds Pharmacy Franchise within a medical centre. And more specifically, Andrew is a very, very highly respected and highly influential character in the pharmacy community, providing a voice for the profession across a number of fora. And that's included being president of the European Pharmacists Forum, as a past committee member for the Pharmaceutical Services Negotiating Committee, currently sitting as chair of the Gloucestershire Local Pharmaceutical Committee, and a current member of the World Pharmacy Council, and also currently on the board of the National Pharmacy Association as well, which he currently chairs. So with that extensive background of experience and influence, it's my really great pleasure, Andrew, to welcome you to give this evening's presentation. So over to you, and thank you.
No, thank you very much, Adrian, and thank you for that introduction. And I really am truly honoured to be asked to join in your centenary celebrations, of course, in the same year that the NPA is also celebrating its centenary, coincidentally. So it's great. I do have really fond memories of being a student in Sunderland, and it was fortunate. I really was fortunate to live on campus for 3 years. Not many people did that. But I was still close enough to home to take my washing back with me. And after my first disaster at the Glebe washroom, I mixed my white lab coat with a red rugby shirt. And after that, I was pretty unique in having the only pink lab coat in the pharmacy department. So, you know, I then after that started to take my washing. It wasn't far back down to Marske by the Sea. And my mother sort of got the washing dumped on her on a regular basis. So yeah, I got some fond memories. I also remember my first taste of great homemade curries, which was sharing meals with 3 of my pals, Suda, Nita and Meb, who some of you might know. Also, I think the nightlife was pretty good too. And even then we'd got Gateshead Stadium hosting the Police, who and at that point the Police were global superstars. So, you know, the Northeast was pretty full on at the time. And soon after graduating in '81, when Phil Collins, The Specials, Michael Jackson, Adam and the Ants dominated the charts, as Adrian said, I joined Boots for my pre-reg and spent some good years between the Northeast and Kent, climbing the corporate ladder. And after many years, as Adrian described, in corporate pharmacy, I ended up buying my first pharmacy for a big pharmacy chain, now a global brand, and decided that if I could do it there, I could do it for myself. So I secured a bank loan. I obviously acquired my own pharmacies, and nearly 20 years on from graduating, I bought my first 2 in Gloucester. I soon went on to build a small chain called AlChem, and over 15 years owned and operated 15 pharmacies from Doncaster in the north to Bournemouth in the south. And many were also located in Devon and Somerset. And from a small office in Torquay, we employed 120 staff across the country. And that was my first real responsibility for others, besides the patients, of course. So I suppose here this evening, I just want to give you a little bit of background about the National Pharmacy Association, which Adrian said I currently chair. And I'm very proud to be in that position because you're voted in by your peers, of course. So the vast majority of independent pharmacies are actually NPA members. And we like to think of ourselves as the family of family-owned pharmacies. Since starting life as the Retail Pharmacists Union, it was in 1921, the NPA has brought community pharmacists together and given a voice and practical support to pharmacies across the UK, because we represent the devolved countries as well as England, of course. Our mission today is to help independent pharmacies succeed professionally and commercially speaking up for them and supporting them to provide excellent patient care. Arguably, the challenge for us and for pharmacy teams has never been greater than it is today, against the formidable backdrop of COVID-19. In all the last 100 years, this is clearly one of the biggest health crises to have faced the pharmacy sector, the NHS and the nation at large. Many of you will become the NPA members of the future, we hope, and who knows, NPA board members even. And you can look back on this time when community pharmacy stepped up to help the nation's COVID vaccination programme, which is a massive success, I think, to the health of the nation. So, as described, the NPA is celebrating our centenary the same year as Sunderland, as I mentioned, and over these 100 years, the association has brought community pharmacists together to pool resources, to learn from each other, and to deliver fantastic patient services at scale. We've also stood together at times of adversity and challenge, as is exactly what we're doing right now. The centenary, as Adrian probably will tell you, is an opportunity to look at the future as well as to reflect on the past achievements. And it would be foolish for me to try and predict exactly what the next 100 years will bring, but it's certain that community pharmacy will need to continually evolve to meet the ever-changing needs of the population and modern consumer expectations. And I think we've all seen COVID-19 has rapidly accelerated several developments in pharmacy business and practice. And you know, will it go back to what it was before? Pharmacies have become the default first port of call for many people, unable to get to a convenient face-to-face appointment with their GP during the pandemic. And whether there'll be a permanent shift in patient behaviours remains to be seen, but this would be significant were it to transpire. We would see pharmacists advising on a wider range of illnesses and making interventions more typically associated with doctors and nurses. And if you like, an extension of the recently introduced community pharmacy consultation service. NHS referral pathways would evolve to recognise and facilitate the new pattern of preventative medicine, translating Fitbit outputs and genomic data into meaningful outputs for those who seek our advice. And I think we're actually starting to see some of that now as people get more concerned about their own health, monitor their own health through devices and wearables. And I think pharmacy will play a really big part in how the public translate that data into meaningful healthcare messages. We need to think deeply about a long list of other issues for the post-crisis world, including the place of online supply, remote consultations, flexible team working, and how pharmacies cooperate with each other to provide a really resilient service. I think if one thing the pandemic has taught us, having a network of pharmacies has made the service resilient. And if one part of it went down, there's always another part that's prepared to step up. Pharmacies need to be progressive and modern. I don't think there's any question about that, while at the same time being true to the historic values of pharmacy as a personal caring profession. I want to see tech-enabled community pharmacies better integrated with other healthcare services, operating efficiently as neighbourhood health and wellbeing centres, providing excellent patient care and recognised as we are now as the front door to the NHS. We've even had a health secretary, Matt Hancock, re-quote our own words back to the nation as he said that community pharmacy was the front door to the NHS. And I've been quite fortunate to have conversations with not just the health secretary this year and last year, but also the vaccine minister, a number of key ministers who are in government at this point in time. And I think, you know, if we pull together as a cooperation of pharmacy bodies, then we will get the government to recognise that pharmacy really can make a difference. It's a vision, I believe, it's grounded in reality that is respectful of the past and makes me excited about the future. And a future which will actually belong to you. And just now starting out on some of your careers, not to me and the current crop of pharmacists and pharmacy leaders, but you know, the students of today are the future of the profession. I'm often asked actually why the NPA doesn't have more women members on its board. And I think it's a reflection of the current makeup of independent community pharmacy owners from where the board is elected. So I'd challenge the young women students to aim for a career in pharmacy business ownership and make a real difference to the future of community pharmacy through that channel. Some things I think will always stay the same, I hope. I hope that community pharmacy will always be fundamentally about people, not just prescriptions, the valued services we provide, and the core knowledge about the medicines we deal with every day. I hope that the community in community pharmacy is always more than just a word. And this world of population health and genomics, there will always be a place for our knowledge and skills at communicating with our patients. I also hope that patients will always be justified in putting their trust in us because we maintain high standards of professionalism and care and see prevention as part of our core offer. And we still remain right up there as one of the most trusted professions that there is. Finally, I hope and believe that the National Pharmacy Association and this esteemed pharmacy school in Sunderland are there to see it all happen and to be at the heart of the action for at least the next 100 years. And to end on a really interesting statistic, and Adrian should be proud of this, that the GPHC figures show that the University of Sunderland is consistently one of the top ranking schools of pharmacy in the National Registration Assessment. So you must be doing something right, Adrian. So that's pretty much all I needed to say. I wanted to say this evening. And I was hoping that there would be plenty of questions. I'm not necessarily able to hopefully answer all of them, but Paul, I think it's over to you to sort of manage the chat as it's coming in.
Right there, yeah. Thanks, Andrew. It's really interesting that we're both sharing our centenary celebrations, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I wish we got a lot more dinners planned, but like you said, you know, the people on the call tonight would normally be at the university, you know, sharing a glass or two, I'm quite sure, and it would have been great to be up there. So who knows, another year.
Definitely, yeah. Okay then, so I'm going to manage some questions, Andrew. So we've got one from Paul. What advice would you give to your younger self, having just finished your pharmacy degree?
It's really interesting, I think. I came to pharmacy ownership quite late. I think I said I had 20 odd years in the corporate life, and I think if I had my time over again, I would have definitely made the break sooner into getting my own business. I think it's always very difficult when you haven't come from a business background, which I didn't. You know, none of my family were in business. My uncle, who's now sadly passed, he was a boots pharmacist all his life, and I think probably looking back, he was probably one of the influences, I would have said, in me taking up pharmacy. And he worked for Boots. I worked for Boots as a Saturday boy for many years, and you know it was almost an inevitable thing that I would go into the Boots organisation. And several iterations later, in various companies, I you know learned my business skills, I suppose, for want of a better word, got more confident. Recognised the banks were prepared to lend to people like me without any capital, yeah, it started that way. So I think if I had my time again, I'd have gone into ownership much more earlier, because it's been very rewarding, very fulfilling. You know, you get your first pharmacy, you know, they're your patients and you really look after them. You know, you get your second one, and you know, particularly where I am in Gloucester, you know, you get to know everyone quite well. Pharmacies were only a few hundred yards apart, and you do get a lot of satisfaction from, you know, the patients that you serve. And I think I probably did that in a small way in a corporate world, but I think when I got my own pharmacy, you really own your own patients, don't you? And I think that's what I wish I'd done a lot sooner.
Right. Okay. Question from Andrew. How will community pharmacies resist the inevitable march of online consultations and next day deliveries? And how will Amazon influence the market with their plans?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I see that quite regularly levelled at the profession. There's always going to be a place for online. There's always going to be a place for Amazon, but I think there'll always be a place for face-to-face consultation as well. Now, you could argue that you can do some of the face-to-face remotely, and inevitably that's already happening, as we've seen GP surgeries doing that. We've seen some pharmacies doing that. But I don't know. I think the community is the community, and very much the communities we serve, certainly across the country, really put their trust in that face-to-face. So I still think there will be the need to have face-to-face consultations with people. It's very reassuring when patients do come in, I think, and see somebody. Inevitably, we won't be able to give flu jabs and COVID jabs remotely. I'm not too sure. Maybe at some point you're going to stick your arm against the screen and a needle will come out. Hey, I'm really not too sure that's going to work. But I think inevitably we will be seeing more and more development of online, more development of tech. But I genuinely believe there will be a face-to-face requirement over many years to come.
Right. Okay, we've got one from Cliff, who we can see his lovely face on the screen there.
How many years, Cliff, was it since we were skiing together? Too many.
Well, Cliff's question: having lost 3 young pharmacists this year to GP surgeries, is the NPA trying to organise? Oh, I've lost the question. Hang on. Is the NPA trying to organise prescribing certificates for community pharmacists?
Well, that's a really interesting one. Yeah, and I think we've seen that, haven't we, Cliff? Everywhere we've seen, some pharmacists. I had one of my best pharmacists leave me to go and join a GP practice, and he really was, the sort of guy. And if I reflect back, I remember a time when it was during the summer. A lady came in from the GP upstairs. Actually, it was a big medical centre that I had. And lady came down from the doctors, saw Richard, my pharmacist, and said, "Oh, I've got this rash on my arm. The I've got a bit of a fever and everything. The doctors just sent me down to get some paracetamol for the fever." So Richard, being Richard as well, and like many of us, very inquisitive, to want to know a little bit more about the patient's problems. He got a glass out and put a glass over the rash on her arm, and sure enough, it was viral meningitis. So he sent her direct to the hospital over the road and saved that woman's life. And I lost him to a GP practice where he was pretty much doing back office work, looking at prescription costs, medicine costs. And I genuinely think we lost, or the community lost somebody, because they loved him. The community lost someone that actually, was that extra safety net. And I just think what we've got to do, we've just got to make it really attractive that those pharmacists who really enjoy the front house patient care, we've got to make the profession in community pharmacy attractive enough that they don't necessarily look elsewhere at those jobs. So I don't think we've got an instant panacea, Cliff, to be honest. But I do think it will help if we get a lot more pharmacists qualifying through the schools, and that's your job, Adrian, and making sure that we've got a steady stream of pharmacists to follow careers in pharmacy, whatever path they take. Because I think, inevitably you've got people who go into different disciplines for different reasons. And Richard went into it because he was working 6 days a week, Saturdays, and he was offered a job in a practice which was 5 days a week, 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. So, you know, you can understand if people want a lifestyle choice, but I also think he did lose, you know, some of the what's the word? Some empathy with the patients that he saw daily, and they loved him. So I think, you know, inevitably there will be shifts. People will move to other areas of the profession, but I genuinely believe that if we make community pharmacy a really great and attractive place, then people won't migrate to other areas, and you know, we will get the right people trained and developed to see the public face to face. Doesn't necessarily answer 100% of your question. The NPA is certainly looking at ways of how we might support you know, our members in that sort of challenge, but I don't think there's an easy answer, Cliff, if I'm honest.
Could I just butt in there, Paul?
Yeah.
It's me and hog the microphone. It's an interesting one that you mentioned around the sort of motivation of students, and I say you may or may not be aware that it's becoming actually increasingly challenging to recruit students nationally to pharmacy programs, because there are increasing student numbers being recruited into medicine, and with the current COVID crisis, actually what we're seeing also is an escalation of students going into other associated healthcare professions, and actually a slight drift away from pharmacy. And I was wondering whether you've got any thoughts on what the NPA and other professional organisations can do to actually promote the profession of pharmacy and the value of pharmacy that can be added to actually inspire the young, you know, those 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds that are just starting to think about career choices and move in that direction, rather than perhaps that constant thing, you know, you need to be a medic, you need to be a medic. Yeah,
again, Adrian, that's an interesting one. The NPA, you may or may not know, the government Kickstart scheme has had, you know, youngsters who are able to come into a business, get taken on. The NPA has supported the Kickstart scheme, and I think it now is around about 1,000 Kickstarters in places in pharmacies. And obviously, what we think there, we will encourage some of those Kickstarters to look at a career in pharmacy. We're also doing that at the local level at LPC. We've got talks in schools going on and things like that. Like you said, in that 14 to 16 age group, trying to encourage people into the profession. And I think that's something we probably need to support local leadership to make that happen across the country in schools, so we get almost like a wave of interest, for want of a better word. And I think with the way that the curriculum's going, with a more clinical output, you know, again, dare I say, it will become a more interesting choice for many people who may originally have thought about medicine. But, you know, if you come out with I think a degree that gives you the confidence to diagnose, like we will see with, you know, the future wave of IPs coming out, I think we will get a much more developed profession in the clinical sense of the word. And I think that in itself should be attractive to many people who perhaps choose medicine currently.
Right, okay. It's an optimistic future. There's a one from Paul. What do you see as the next frontiers for pharmacy in the UK, and how should pharmacy education evolve to address that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really interesting one. Subject that's dear to my own heart is genomics. And again, I think this is something that pharmacy perhaps hasn't really been involved in the past, but it's certainly going to be of the age. Everything will be around the genome, and you know, it doesn't matter what you know, what disease we're looking at. There's always something that can be traced back to the genome. And I think with COVID-19, even we've seen the different levels of disease states that people are suffering with COVID being down to your genetic makeup, of course. And I think pharmacy, not just on pharmacogenomics, where we know that medicines, have a different effect with different people depending on their genetic makeup. And I think we will find different branches of genomics being open to pharmacy, and it's all part of that patient diagnostic process. I think the prevention agenda that certainly the current Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, wants us to follow, I think is absolutely opening the doors for that level of development within the profession to take up, new forms of medicine diagnosis. I think genomics is right up there. In fact, one of the things that we did at the NPA just over a couple of years ago now, we've been working with Genomics England quite closely on where pharmacy can fit in, and we hope that we can shape Genomics England's thinking and the way that might work with some of the academic institutes that obviously are heavily into genomics. Certainly UCL, I don't know, Adrian, forgive me, I'm not too sure what happens at Sunderland around genomics, but I think that's something that will inevitably play a large role in what pharmacists will do in the future.
All right. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Right, another question then. You've mentioned Matt Hancock a few times now. Do you think this is from Jane? Do you think the important role that pharmacists play in the health of their communities and the trust people have in pharmacists is fully appreciated by the government?
That's a really interesting question. Until I became chair of the NPA, I would say this, wouldn't I? Probably not. We've made it our mission to actually put community pharmacy on the map in the government's eyes. And I think we've seen NHS England on the one hand, with a view of where the profession's going. And we've worked closely with NHS England, and I know the devolved countries have worked with their governments. Interestingly, one of the more, I think, forward-thinking governments, and that's probably because they're quite small and compact, is Scotland. We were quite fortunate to have Jason Leach, who's their chief advisor on healthcare in Scotland to the government, on our conference last year. And it's really interesting if you watch Jason on TV. He's very succinct. He's very down the line, and I think certainly where we've got to with the Trust for Pharmacy, he certainly recognised that pharmacies have a massive role to play. We realised that what we needed to do was to just take it to the government. Now, you could argue that many a campaign was sort of won or lost on its slogans, but we managed to come up with just this front door to the NHS, and we kept plugging away on that. We've been plugging away on that for a number of years, and actually to get the Health Secretary to repeat those words, that pharmacies were the front door to the NHS. That I don't think the public have any problem trusting us. The number of surveys we've done have just demonstrated that we are there, right up there in high levels of trust. And communicating that to the government, whilst it was a bit challenging early on, it's become a lot easier. So I met Lord Pryor, who's obviously the boss of the NHS, and we had conversations with Lord Pryor and his team last year. I also led a round table where we had the vaccine minister, Nadeem Zahawi. We had the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, and effectively, we were trying to understand what the government saw in us, and it's been really interesting to see an outsider's view. And this is why I think engagement local engagement of pharmacies with their local MPs is absolutely vital. And the one thing that keeps coming back is how many MPs didn't even know pharmacies did flu jabs. It's absolutely, we all are in pharmacy. Of course, we know we do flu jabs, but to get an MP who didn't know we did flu jabs, I thought, well, that's actually quite telling. We've not got the message out. And I think, what I'd say this evening is at local level, we need to educate the local MPs because they actually take it back to government. We've had some advocates, Jackie Doyle-Price, for example, who now chairs the all-party pharmacy group on pharmacy. We had many meetings with her last year, and it's great that she now chairs that all-party pharmacy group because she's got some advocates of Conservative MPs and across the parties who are really support what pharmacy does. Just the other day, I had a conversation with the Shadow Health Secretary, John Ashworth, and again, he's a great supporter of community pharmacy. So I think gradually what the NPA has done, we've really worked with the other bodies like PSNC to make sure some of the messages are joined up. So the sector is now, I think, thought of differently to what it was certainly 2 years ago. And I can genuinely say the NPA has played its part in that.
Okay, there's a one from Neela. Having been a pre-reg tutor for decades, I am disappointed after getting the students on the register, they end up tied to the dispensary bench. This is particularly disheartening as I see the students have so much more clinical knowledge than I did in 1977. There's got to be more that the PSNC can do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Certainly, we work quite closely with the PSNC, of course, as one of the recognised pharmacy trade bodies, the NPA, and we would 100% agree with that. We would not want to see students and young pharmacists getting disillusioned with the profession early on because they were chained to the dispensary bench. It's all about patients. It's all about communication with patients and building up the levels of trust. And I can only speak from my experience in my pharmacies, but I termed most of my senior staff practice managers, I called them. They weren't the pharmacists. They got on with doing the dispensing, the checking and everything. My pharmacists were front of house speaking to patients in the consultation room, and that's where patients want us. They want us talking to them because that's the face of community pharmacy. So I would encourage all my pharmacy colleagues to think about that and think about how they can release themselves from that dispensing bench by delegating some of the work to their teams, which doesn't necessarily happen in every pharmacy, as certainly I've witnessed, but I think that's the key to unlocking the future, to give the profession much more reward for what it does. Professional reward.
Yeah. I think Neil has got just a follow-up comment saying that pharmacies remained open throughout the COVID crisis, while GPs, dentists, opticians closed. And what has the profession got in return? Not even recognition from the Department of Health.
Yeah, that's a battle that we're still fighting, of course. And the telling part of that will be what happens in the budget next week. I think we've been battling the fact that we've had some COVID costs, and I'm sure that's what this refers to. We've been open. Many of our members have got ill with COVID. Some of them sadly have passed as well, which was absolutely tragic. And to have the government not even pay us our costs for being open during certainly the early part of the pandemic, when we were buying our own PPE, we're having to put up our own screens. There was no funding for it at the time, and we lobbied really hard at that time to really make sure that they got talking to the PSNC and tried to solve that one. But obviously we're not the negotiator. We certainly try and support the negotiator where we can with some of our advocacy. and it's something that we're still trying to help PSNC with to solve that, because it's it's an absolute travesty to not have all of our pharmacists out there and our community pharmacy owners who've literally had the front doors open all the way through the pandemic, while as you described that many GPs have done remote consultations and closed their doors, and I think actually we should be making more of that. We should absolutely be making more of that on the basis that those extra visits that came to us in community pharmacy, those are maybe patients that maybe will stay with pharmacy, and they won't go back and queue in a congested doctor's waiting room, waiting for appointments 3-4 weeks on, when actually you can just walk into your pharmacy, as they've perhaps found easily during the pandemic, and getting good trusted service. So hopefully out of the back of the pandemic will come some positives that patients will use us differently, of course, going forward.
Yeah. Okay, one from Paul again. Do you think we need pharmacists entering the political arena to advocate and shine a light on how our profession is a core to the healthcare service and has such a versatile and vast potential?
Yeah, you know what, I absolutely agree with that. I think more pharmacists who are in many areas pillars of their community are absolutely ideally placed to run for office as MPs. Absolutely. We've just had a conversation, oddly enough, just yesterday with Taiwo, and I think she's in Coventry. She's the MP for Coventry. She's a pharmacist. She obviously gets it, and she's one of our advocates. She's taking the message into government, but we could do with a lot more. Is the answer to that? And I would encourage many community pharmacy owners out there who are known by their communities to think about that, because without that it is very difficult to get the message across. Like I said, there were some MPs that didn't even know we did flu jabs, which I just thought was really
Right. Okay. I've got no more questions, but can I ask one? Because I'd like just to reflect back over the 100 years of pharmacy in Sunderland, and reflecting back on my career as well, and thinking of the sort of technological advances that have occurred. And really, in the last 30 years since I've been qualified, a lot's changed in community pharmacy. I mean, when I was at college, we were typing labels on typewriters, black ink for internal and red ink for external. Now, so where do you see technology heading in the next 30 years? Will dispensaries be very different, do you think?
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure they will be. I mean, I remember the same. I was handwriting labels, rolling them over the sticky thing, sticking them on. I think if you look at the pharmacy profession over the years, we've moved out of what I would call the compounding era. Then we've moved into more about medicines and specialty medicines in some areas as well, and I think that will progress naturally. I think as we find more and more complex molecules coming through to treat rare diseases, for example, I hark back to the genomics piece as well, that I think there's a role there for pharmacies to get more involved in the specialty medicines. So I don't see any reason why pharmacists cannot become consultants and become specialists. Here we've got Jackie down in Devon, who won an award recently for being an oncology specialist. She advises some of the oncology consultants in the local hospital, and I think that there's definitely going to be a shift in the way pharmacists operate. And many people will say, well, actually, that's just for hospital. You know what? I don't think it is, because I think more and more people will want to be looked after in their communities. I don't think they want to go to the big monolith where, you know, you might catch something. I think that's one of the things where, even though many hospitals have been open during the pandemic for regular elective surgery, I know some have had to cut that back, but many people have not attended appointments because in fear of getting the disease. Now, you know, that pattern, that shift means that those people will be looking elsewhere for their support. And I think community pharmacy is really well placed, you know, to be that support. And yeah, I see it as a bright future. And I think the schools, you know, the schools will shape their curricula based on the opportunities, I think, that we see in the shift of healthcare going forward. And technology, you know, whether it be printing 3D stuff out and all the other things that's out there, you know, what pharmacy has always had is good knowledge about medicines, good knowledge about therapeutics. And, you know, we do a lot more in our training than any GP will do about medicines. So I don't think perhaps we articulate that well locally. I think some of the local health systems, we're not as integrated perhaps as we could be. So, you know, there's lots of challenges, but I think the profession's on a good footing, you know, and with the clinical way that the curricula is coming through at the moment, even more so, even more as a competitor, for want of a better word, to the GP, because I think the patients love us, to be honest.
Yeah, very interesting. I can see. I was conjuring up an image there of 3D printers in dispensaries and personalized medicine, you know, and actually printing it there and then and giving it to the patient. Maybe not.
Yeah, well, you know, who knows, Paul? 10 years away.
One from Neela. Do you think it's time for the PSNC and the NPA to put their heads together to win the hearts and the minds of patients with clever and hard-hitting ads about funding and stress in pharmacy?
You know what? That again is really timely. So I chair what they call the COVID communications group, surprisingly enough, which is a small subgroup of board members at the NPA that are absolutely on that mission. And I can't say much about it, but we are going to see a campaign launched fairly soon. PSNC, I think, put out a note just yesterday from Zoe at PSNC about the planned campaign with a bunch of MPs that Zoe had highlighted. So we're going to be working with PSNC on that campaign to do exactly as Neela describes there.
Right, a query from Paul. Were you involved with the SPSA when you were at the university? If not, why not?
Oddly enough, I seem to spend, I look back and think, how on earth did I qualify? I spent most of my time playing squash and badminton in my mind. I must have obviously been doing some work separately from that. But yeah, my social activity at Sunderland was sport. I was never a big runner or anything like that. I never used to go jogging. I probably did far too much drinking, but most students do that anyway, don't they? And but badminton and squash, I always used to be able to keep relatively fit. But no, I was never a member of the association, sadly.
Right. And then one from Teresa. Do you think there would be a disadvantage to fourth-year students graduating this year wanting to go into community pharmacy compared to students who will get the opportunity to do the integrated 5-year course, whereby they will have the opportunity to be more prepared in terms of independent prescribing?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, for an old person like me, I think the challenge is more for my generation, who maybe have another 10 years at pharmacy. How do we get our heads around the new clinical agenda. I think students will adapt very quickly. I absolutely don't have any issues with thinking they're being disadvantaged at all. I think the early years are going to be learning years anyway, and whether it's continual professional development, further courses that you take post graduation, I don't think that will become an issue. I do see it being an issue for my generation, like I said, who are business owners, who are facing a new clinical career, for want of a better word, and it's I think it's going to be more challenging for us oldies to learn than it is for the youngsters who are actually used to learning. I'm not too sure if that fully answers the question, but I just think they've got time on their side. Adrian might want to comment about that. I don't know.
It is certainly an interesting one, and I think we've seen certainly that students are very, very resilient in terms of the way in which they approach their education, the way in which they are able to adapt. But to say, it is very, very interesting with the change in the initial education and training standards for pharmacists on that clinical focus and the expectation that students will be independent prescribers the moment they hit the register. And I think that's a very, very interesting agenda, and we will see how that plays out in the future. But for sure, I think I agree, Andrew. It does create a bit of a pharmacist divide, a bit of a pharmacist gap between those that are currently practicing and those that are coming through, and that will be an interesting challenge, as you say, for some of the older ones as to how they adapt to that particular situation. But of course, that does not mean that all of the good stuff that pharmacists are capable of doing will not continue. And I think the overriding message that we've got here is that the message of what pharmacists are able to do in the community is still not a fully understood message. And that is at the highest level of government, as you've highlighted on a couple of occasions. And that is a challenge, and it's how that is overcome and how that is moved forward with good agendas and good education of everybody.
So I'd urge every pharmacist on this call who's got the ability to give a jab to an MP, get them in your pharmacy and jab your local MP. And if you're running a COVID vaccination centre, and you're a pharmacy-led COVID vaccination centre like some of our members are, then get your MPs along to those as well. Because again, I think it is about education of the politicians. And if we haven't got many pharmacists who are politicians as well, then we have to educate the ones that we've got. So it's all grist to the mill, really. We've just got to sort of get on with it, and hopefully they'll get the message, because let's face it, the public like us, and at the end of the day, the MPs are the public, and technically they should be getting their medicines from a local pharmacy near them. And you would hope that that local pharmacy has a good relation, or could build a good relationship with their MP to make sure they really understand what pharmacy does.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we've got time for one more quick question, and this is what is your view on the move to a more integrated doctorate of pharmacy degree? In many European countries and in the US, they do that. Could that boost both the professional image and student recruitment?
Yeah, again, another interesting one. Having spent nearly 10 years on the European Pharmacist Forum, I obviously got to meet many of my pharmacist colleagues across Europe. And now on the World Pharmacy Council, I get to, meet and liaise with colleagues from America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and some of the English-speaking countries around the world. And you know what? Strangely enough, during the pandemic, I think we've been slightly ahead of the curve in terms of the way pharmacy has evolved in the UK compared to some of the other countries. And I think we've made a case to the UK government to utilise pharmacy, and COVID vaccination has been one really good example of that. I was banging on about COVID vaccination back in March, saying, look, prepare pharmacists, prepare community pharmacists. I think my mantra then was, we're ready, we're trained, we will deliver. I kept it very simple. And in Spain, for example, they're not they're not allowed to vaccinate. So, you know, again, I don't think the fact that a doctorate will actually get you any further. I think what will get you further is an understanding of the government, from the government, on what value we add to the healthcare system. And I think if we can articulate that in a better way than we do now, that will probably go a long way further to you know, ensuring that we've got a brighter future. And I'm not too sure, again, that 100% answers the question, but I don't think the doctorate of pharmacy really gives them any advantage, is I think what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for leading on a very, very interesting set of questions for Andrew, and thank you, Andrew, for responding to all of those questions. Very, very insightful. So finally, it just leaves it to me to say thank you very, very much, Andrew, for what has been, as has just been picked up there, an absolutely excellent and thought-provoking session. And again, I think it provides us all with an inspiration and a vision to go forward to really promote what pharmacists are able to do and what pharmacists are able to offer, and also to go forward with that promotion through the continuing education of everybody of the services that are actually available and what is available in the future. And I think if that can be done in the right way, the future is exceptionally bright for the services that community pharmacy can offer. But I say it does come back to that education and that training of everybody to understand what is available. So thank you very, very much for your time this evening, Andrew. I say it's been very, very interesting, very, very thought-provoking. I think that has also been emphasised by the questions that we've seen that's come through this evening, as Kath has just highlighted there. So thanks to Paul again for the Q&A, really, really good. And also thanks to the people behind the scenes here. So there's a number of people that we haven't seen. So the events team that have put this thing together and coordinated this evening and made it available to everybody. So thanks to Rachel, Lauren, Sarah and Elena for coordinating that all this evening. And thanks, in the most part, for everybody this evening for taking the time to be with us, for taking the time to take part in that question and answer session. And I hope we've all gone away with something from what Andrew has said as a very, very positive vision for the future and how one can all contribute. And finally, it just remains, thank you for you all to be here. Thank you, and hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. And finally, within this current situation, please stay safe and take care. Thanks you all.
Adrian. I echo that. Thanks very much.
Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff.